to our presentation on the Living Newspaper by Michelle, Alyssa, Tim, Cody, Haley, and myself, Erin. We decided to separate the work so we can help further our knowledge about the Living Newspaper. So the first slide has to do with the history. So it all started in Russia during World War I, and they used this for propaganda to help gain support for the war. The Living Newspaper was also founded during the Great Depression by Franklin D. Roosevelt and came up with the New Deal to help with people who were unemployed to find work. Later on, the Living Newspaper was actually known as the Federal Theater Project, funded under the New Deal. They talked about the types of problems such as housing, disease, and then the government and the economy. They got their facts from mouth-to-mouth statistics, and then they also had first-hand experience during this. Since the topics of communism came up to play, the United States government decided to shut down the Federal Theater Project because they did not want to lose support from their people. But it also inspired actors, performers, and then it also further to help with children participate in the theater.
I'm Tim Anderson, and I'm going to talk about one specific play, and that is 1/3 of a Nation. This is one that the Living Newspaper put on. It was inspired by something that Franklin D. Roosevelt said in his second inaugural address. He said, "I see 1/3 of a nation ill-housed, ill-clad, and ill-nourished. The test of our progress is not whether we add to the abundance of those who have much, it is whether we provide enough for those who have too little." And so Arthur Arndt took that and ran with it and wrote this play. And I'll go over the plot a little bit. It starts on this burning tenement that you'll see right here. That's an apartment, really bad housing in the slums of New York City. And the whole play focuses on two characters. The little man, who is the person who is really being hurt by this poverty, by this bad housing in New York City, and then also the voice of the Living Newspaper. This is never actually a physical character on the screen, but his voice comes in and he has an attitude throughout the whole play. Over time, this bad housing gets more expensive, and the size of the land and the quality of the living goes down, all while cholera, tuberculosis, crime, theft are a big problem in these slums. So it really focuses on the issues at hand. Well, at the same time, there are wealthy landlords and landowners living just a few streets away who have really nice housing. And this is characterized in the play by a nice green spot of land with a sign that says, "This is mine, keep off." Surrounded by him are people who would be living in the slums. He's got this very nice plot of land while they're living in a burning tent. Now, over the course of the play, 100 years passes, and the little man in the play becomes more politically active and tries to make social change happen. It actually ends on the Housing Act of 1937. Throughout this, money was supposed to be pumped into the slums and into the housing agencies to increase and alleviate a lot of the issues. This should be a big hurrah moment, but it actually turns out that only 2% of the New York slums were actually influenced and alleviated by this Housing Act. So the main character says, "We'll keep working until everyone has a decent place to live in America." And finally, the fourth wall breaks at the last moment of the play and urges the audience to join the fight with them. Now, this play is really interesting because they were actually able to adapt the ideas in the set to different cities that they were performing in. For example, in Cincinnati, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Seattle, they would adapt it to make this not look like a New York City tenement, but like those of the corresponding city. Now, fast forward 70 years, where a revival of this play is taking place in New York City. This was put on by the Metropolitan Playhouse in 2011. Someone from the New York Times said, "This is part history lesson, part protest." And now fast forward just a few years later, where we have a candidate running for a presidential election named Bernie Sanders, who's really shedding light on these issues, just like the Living Newspaper was trying to do 70 years ago. He's focusing on the increasing wage gap and the shrinking middle class and increased disparity between the rich and the poor. And I think that's really interesting and accomplishes the same goal the Living Newspaper was trying to do.
Alright, my name's Michelle Gable, and today I'm going to be talking about major historical events that were going on during the time of the Living Newspaper. And the first one I want to talk about is the Great Depression. It began in 1929 and ended in 1939. It was the longest lasting economic downturn in history, which caused the stock market to crash. In October of 1929, that sent Wall Street into panic and wiped out millions of investors. So for the next several years, consumer spending and investment dropped, which caused a steep decline in industrial output and unemployment. And then in 1933, nearly 15 million Americans were unemployed, which leads me to my next event, the Federal Theater Project. And this was established on August 27th of 1935 And what it was a New Deal program to fund theater and other live artistic performances during the Great Depression. It's directed by Haley Flanagan, and I'll give you a little bit of background on her. She was the first woman to receive the Guggenheim Fellowship to study theater in Europe, and what that is a grant that's awarded to those who have exceptional creative abilities in the arts. And while she was in Europe, she wrote a book up on her experiences. But it was sponsored by the WPA, which is the Works Progress Administration, and what that is an agency that employed millions of unemployed. The Federal Theater Project One employed musicians, artists, actors, and directors, and they were giving $27 million to employ these people. So this helped to provide relief for the unemployment during the Great Depression.
My name is Haley Kozar, and I'll be presenting on how the Living Newspaper relates to this class, Creative Dramatics. So oftentimes people think of theater as a form of entertainment, but it can also be used for boosting imagination, confidence, can also be used in schools and for therapy, but in this case it's used for social change. So social change in theater is theater that allows us to study problems in society and attempt to solve them. So in a sense, the audience is thinking about what's going on, they get angry about it, and they want to change and fix the problem. So for example, the Living Newspaper performed a piece on the Great Depression, which allowed the audience to think about the problems going on, such as starving children, and that it was difficult for people to afford housing. So they wanted the audience to think about the problem and attempt to solve the issues going on. The Living Newspaper urges social action and reacts against naturalistic and realistic theater. Realistic theater is meant to look real. It has the same purpose as the Living Newspapers, but unlike realistic theater, the Living Newspaper is not meant to look real. It is actually in favor of more direct theater, political theater. This theater focuses on political issues, political action, and it is intended to make a point. It addresses issues of current events going on and encourages consciousness and social change.
My name is Cody, and I'm going to be talking about the influences, the groups of people that were influenced by the Living Newspaper. The Living Newspaper put on a play that was called Power, and in Seattle. And the mayor of Seattle actually demanded that the show be played all throughout the entire week because there was because of the Bonneville Electric Project, which was all the big power companies in the town were trying to gain. We're trying to get the people in the town to back them up because they needed the support from the city, and so the mayor put the show on for the whole entire week so he could get the support of his of everyone living in the town, which was really awesome. And in Richard Stockton College in New Jersey, there are two professors that actually took their ideas from the Living Newspaper and brought them into the classroom, which was really awesome. They used the Living Newspapers to teach students to identify and offer solutions to temporary problems. It was really neat because at the end of the class, they actually make the students create a play based on world problems. Like, for example, some of the plays were about teen pregnancy and about racism. The Living Newspaper's base is in New York, but it doesn't stop in New York. California and Chicago, there's plays constantly going on from the Living Newspaper there. And the really neat thing is that the plots about the Living Newspaper are for the people. It's about poverty, and it's about things that people go through in everyday life.
My name is Alyssa, and I'm just going to kind of go off of what Cody said and tell you a few more things that were influenced by the Living Theater. First was something called the Theater of Cruelty, which was developed by actor and playwright Antonin Artaud. What it did was kind of eliminate the fourth wall between the audience and the play that was actually going on. It was a way for the audience to feel unexpressed emotions of their subconscious, and then it had them escape from the real world and kind of have the realization of what their worst nightmares are and their biggest fears are. Another thing that was influenced by the Living Newspaper was the reinvention of the classical documentary form of the Living Newspaper called thelivingnewspaper.net. What it did mainly was turn young people into citizen journalists, offering new approaches of teaching things like literacy, the humanities, citizenship, and media studies. It also told news stories and global issues from the perspectives of young people rather than just hearing it from news anchors. But mainly the website taught young people how to make their own living newspapers. And I have 2 examples of those. First are from the students in RE lessons at the Brobridge High School in North Yorkshire. They did their living newspaper on the summer riots in 2011 that took place in the UK. And the second group that made their own living newspaper from the website was from the Soundview Academy in New York City. They did their living newspaper on what it was like to grow up in the Bronx. And lastly, we'd like to share with you our sources, and we hope you enjoyed learning about the living newspaper.